The Blood of Emmett Till by Timothy B. Tyson is a novel concerning racism in the justice system following the murder of an African-American teenager. Emmett Till's killers were acquitted of all charges ensuing a trial in which the judge and jury were entirely white. Tyson attempts to highlight the abhorrent treatment of blacks that took place before the dawn of the civil rights movement. Racism across the country, especially in the South, made life dangerous for blacks. Positions of power and authority were held exclusively by whites, and their racial prejudices seeped into the courtroom. In the case of Emmett Till, the heavy bias of the Mississippian criminal justice system resulted in an unjust verdict. This brought to light the extreme inequality that African Americans faced. The death of a young boy from Chicago catalyzed the civil rights movement, yet white supremacy and racism is far from obsolete. African Americans all over the nation continue to feel the effects of an anti-black culture. The systematic acceptance of discrimination of blacks presents itself today in front of a judge and inside of a courtroom. In contemporary times, it is evident that there is a prevailing resentment of people of color. In 2015, nearly 60% of hate crimes were racially driven, leaving small portions for religion, sexual orientation, and gender. It is axiomatic that racism is the most severe issue threatening the prosperity of the country. The process in which America has persistently subjugated African Americans has been portrayed by the killing of Trayvon Martin in 2012. The Neighborhood Watch official who shot him, George Zimmerman, reported Martin for nothing more than suspicious behavior. Today's society has made the killing of black people and its insignificant repercussions commonplace. Almost indistinguishable from the killers of Emmett Till, Zimmerman was acquitted of all charges because of society's inability to recognize the discriminatory intent in the acts that he committed. Purely because of racist sentiments, Zimmerman surmised that Martin was in some way dangerous, and in the court of law, that justified his decision to kill him. Similar to the movement against racism following Till's murder, the case of Trayvon Martin has inspired people to act. The Million Hoodies Movement for Justice is a non-profit organization whose mission is to shape the era that ends anti-black culture. They focus on leadership development, grassroots organizing, and education in order to build a safe country for African Americans. Although many are hard at work to end racism, much more help is needed to eradicate the discrimination seen in the criminal justice system. In America, sentences for similar crimes are almost 20% longer when the convicted is black rather than white. Issues like these make clear the black prejudice in the court of law. The effects of racism on the black community have reverberated throughout the country for decades. Prior to the civil rights movement, growing up black was dangerous and required extremely cautious behavior. Unfortunately, in modern day, not much has changed. According to Clint Smith, an African-American poet and educator, rules about how a black man must act were drilled into his head at a young age. Smith recounts an event from his childhood in which his father removed him from a late-night water gun fight with his white friends in fear that he would be perceived as having a real gun. He was scolded and told that he cannot act like his white counterparts, or else he might be arrested or killed. Lectures like these are being taught all across the country in response to the countless acts of criminal injustice against blacks. American society is one in which black people are at a serious disadvantage in comparison to whites. Many are quick to assume that colored people are guilty of wrongdoings simply because the corrupted system that they grew up in has hardwired them to do so. It is imperative to recognize the failure of the country as a whole, even when looking at individual or personal acts of racism. Racism and legality should remain separate and never become intertwined. The last thing that belongs in a courtroom is prejudice of any kind, yet black people still face injustice at the hands of empowered racists. The extreme disparity between the treatment of blacks and whites within the justice system has become a national crisis, one that has no place in the 21st century. Studies have shown that African Americans are significantly more likely to be convicted for sexual assault, murder, and drug-related crimes than white people. African Americans being judged and punished in a harsher manner emphasizes the concealed racist dispositions that society has towards blacks. These underlying racist notions within America have sparked a modern-day revolution, similar to that of the revolution incited by Emmett Till. This movement is known as the Black Lives Matter movement, and in the same way that the civil rights movement began after the death of Emmett, this movement was initiated by the death of Trayvon Martin. The Black Lives Matter campaign stresses the idea that all people are equal, a philosophy that was emphasized during the civil rights movement by Martin Luther King Jr. Unfortunately, 60 years later, his dream that people of color wouldn't be judged by their skin has not been accomplished. In the case of Emmett Till, both judge and jury were entirely white. Today, factors like this still have effects. Blacks are convicted about 15% more than whites when the jury is completely white, yet with the inclusion of only one black person, the rates of conviction are almost identical. Such non-diverse conditions instantly turn the courts against African Americans. This heinous discrimination of African Americans within the justice system seems to be never-ending. If nothing is done to prevent the judgment against blacks, America will continue to see a wave of African Americans fighting for equality, and rightfully so. Racism has tainted this country in such a way that it will take great work to rid it completely. Emmett Till left the world shocked and frightened as African Americans were afraid they might soon be lying next to him. In 2012, Barack Obama stated that Trayvon Martin could have been himself 35 years earlier. Obama asserts that America has stripped young Trayvon of his future and disregarded the law completely. The lurking preconceptions about African Americans are frightening. In 2018, over 150 years since the abolishment of slavery and over 50 years since the civil rights movement, the fact that blacks are still seen as inferior is disgraceful and unsettling. Even the law, something so concrete, has fallen victim to racial bias. In the words of Timothy Tyson, America is still killing Emmett Till. Few improvements have been made with regards to the treatment of blacks since this horrific event in the 1950s. Even though the death of Emmett Till inspired a revolution, America has maintained an underlying prejudice towards African Americans in the justice system.